We are 66 times.
Hello again. Welcome to 66 Times. My name's Peter Gurry, and this is the 66 Times podcast. And you're listening to episode 5, From Theory into Practice. Remember back in my initial podcast, the intro to the entire series, where I referred to the audiences that I'd catered for. Now, I also referred to those as use cases. Just to remind you, those use cases were 1, those in planning mode, 2, those in mid-transition and wanting validation, and 3, those who've completed a technical program of work, connected but not yet operationalized, and released their capability. So for those in planning mode, to be able to action and respond rapidly in times of crisis, I want you to consider the following. I wouldn't be true to the 66 times 4 Ps if I didn't first ask you to build a very clear picture of your team's current ability to plan and build the tools required and ultimately respond in times of crisis. Once capabilities and feasibilities are understood, it's then very important to ensure your success is measured and basically build an analytics framework that not only caters for the in-market requirement that you're far more familiar with, but also puts analytics in place that manages internal adoption and internal qualities as well. All this would become irrelevant if you don't establish a very clear line of communication with the executive level. I'll start with the CFO, because the CFO is critical to achieving the ultimate goal, as the ultimate goal will most likely require several iterations of investment. Then make very, very clear your crisis plan, a 4P perspective, ensuring that not only people, process, programs of work are clearly defined, and the platform dependencies and requirements of them. Consider that your macro level. Now, if you look at the micro level, the more tactical, the more detailed, ensure that you pre-plan your crisis requirements from a 4P perspective. Now, what that means is everything you want to do, everything you think you should do, ensure that you address the people, the process, the programs of work to release it, and the platform requirements and dependencies. So everything needs to be holistic. And then once you've established that, let's call it a really want list, then go on to consider what is your first release. So pre-plan your release requirements to include your revenue and your crisis response capabilities. You have now reached a point where you know what you want to do. You can also see the feasibility of achieving it in your current state. At this point, I like to stall and establish a go or no-go point. This aligns everybody, and this is the most critical point in any project. If everybody moves forward, everybody is to move forward with the same expectations and the same commitments. Okay, this brings us to our second use case. Those who are in mid-transition but are sanity checking their progress. I would ask you to reconsider all the points outlined for those planning their requirements. In addition to these points, pay particular attention and focus your energy on establishing adoption KPIs and success dependencies. And finally, those in our third audience or use case, I would again suggest you go back and look at those points outlined for those in the planning phase. In addition, establish a clear view of adoption feasibility. To do this, map your process and your evolution programs to your people skills and their availability. And when I say availability, the utilization, the freedom that they have to adopt something else other on top of what they're already doing. In time, you may have a view where certain tasks are going to be replaced by others. However, there'll be a great deal of time, and this time will appear iteratively, remember, as you evolve, where there are an overlap of the existing BAU responsibilities with education, adoption, and ultimately planning of new evolution. This brings me to my final point for the connected, but yet to operationalize. But it is also incredibly important for the other use cases or audiences to remember this point as well, because you too shall arrive here. Now, that is very quickly, once you have the map of what it is that you aim to do and the level of pressure that is expected of your team, determine what it is that you need and how frequently. What I mean by that is, what is your full-time employee? What is your full-time team structure versus what are you going to buy from an external party? This is critical. This is critical for the following reasons. Now, a lot of businesses have the, let's call it, the desire to be fully self-autonomous, fully internalized, with a minimal, if not non-existing, external party structure. Now, that's a fair enough concept, but in moments like this, it leads to this potential outcome. An overinflated team structure, which is not great, because you're paying for headcount you don't need. You're basically also creating an environment where certain people who have been brought on with a full-time capacity are not being utilised or making work for themselves. If some expert external party could do a job in a quarter of the time of the individual that you're hiring as an FTE, you have to ask yourself, for the remaining time that FTE is in your business, what are they doing? Now, they'll become busy, but they'll become busy creating work. Now, more often than not, they do that by stepping on other programs of work, getting collaborative, but not collaborative, being disruptive, slowing you down. An external party will focus and stick to their knitting and basically get the job done. My advice to you is not only when you understand your current team's capabilities and what they can iteratively take on at key points, arrive very quickly at what you're going to expect from external parties. Having this clear view of what your internal team is and what an external team's responsibility is essential to your success. It is at the cornerstone of agility. It is at the cornerstone of being able to respond and know who to expect what from in a moment of crisis. This is one of the things that I see that goes wrong the most. Businesses expect external parties to act as, say, creative capacities only. But that is not necessarily the best way forward at all. It is at this point that we near the end of episode 5. In this episode, we've discussed the importance of understanding the capabilities of your people, also the understanding of how they respond to iterative cycles. But the bigger point is, while you're collaborating internally, knowing that you've readied yourself for iterative improvement, but you've also fine-tuned your people so that you know the difference between a full-time employee and an external responsibility. Because like we've said, people creating work for themselves is just as dangerous as not having enough people. And I would ask you, do you know which of your people have not enough on and are actually creating work for themselves? And can you discern the difference between that created work and work that they should have been doing as their basic core responsibility? Now, I can tell you now, it's very damn hard for the average C-level to tell those tasks or those deliverables apart. The only way I can say you can tell them apart is if you've got a lot of people and you've got a lot of people bumping into each other and that's somehow getting in the way of the core objective. Well, you might want to look at what FTEs you have in the business and whether they're actually required. Now, the processes that go on within the business, once you have the right number of people doing the right type of tasks, the processes and the programs of work and how they iteratively work with their platforms, well, then that starts to take shape for yourself. But while we're talking about being tactical and tangible here, this is all about people working efficiently. People working to efficient processes, knowing their responsibilities, and ultimately knowing when to lean on an external party. Now, as a bit of an antidote to wrap up, one of the things in my career that has continually brought the whole success undone right from the beginning is when the client basically says, no, we will manage the requirements ourselves. Now, when that happens, and it happens suboptimally, and that a set of requirements move direct or skip a step, like skip a planning or a specification step, and straight into, say, a production one, it goes wrong from there. So sometimes the specification, instead of coming from your internal team, they may be expert, but they may lack the time. So when you start off at the beginning, not only do you have to consider, is my team smart? Am I well equipped? You need to also consider the best people for doing that very, very, very important job. Defining and planning, and then ultimately specifying what has been defined and planned. Anyway, rather long wrap up, but this is where I leave you. We are now going to do a more detailed review of what we've spoken of in episode 6. The summary.